Andrew Catchpole, editor of Harper's Wine and Spirit, and welcome to our virtual SITT, Supercharging the Entry-Level Offer webinar. For obvious reasons, we couldn't offer the tasting part of our specialist importers trade tasting events today, but we can at least still bring you a virtual taste of the features we normally run at these events. I hope some of you enjoyed listening to Jancis's opening session a little earlier, keeping it independent, and we're going to continue very much in an independent theme this morning. To do so, I'm joined by a panel of superb independent merchants, all quite different businesses, but all rightfully proud, I'd say, of their indie ethos, which, as Jancis said earlier, collectively forms the backbone of quality wine retail in the UK. So welcome to Tom Jones from the Whalley Wine Shop.
Hi, thanks for inviting me, Andrew.
Thank you. Hannah Wilkins from Vineyards of Sherborne.
Morning, everybody.
Archie McDiarmid from Luvians.
Hello.
Jason Millar from Theatre of Wine. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
And Matt Tipping of Jeroboams.
Good morning.
Morning all. Now, supercharging the entry-level offer. Most independent merchants understandably shy away from the rather drab term entry-level, preferring to focus attention on quality and individuality across all levels of their range. And now, while I realise it's been tough for a lot of businesses out there, the pandemic has skewed consumer buying patterns, and many indies have actually reported, certainly to us, a new custom being driven to the sector, some from supermarkets, along with businesses picked up from those obviously unable to visit hospitality venues, much of that business being via online sales or click and collect. And also there's a growing sensibility out there among customers to shop local. So we're going to be asking today if there are opportunities to retain some of this business as and when restrictions ease. And as part of that, we're going to explore how best to tailor the lower priced offer, entry level if you like, to retain the indie ethos, but also to help beat multiple and online giants at their own game, and ask whether this can be tailored so as to further engage and retain a broader customer base sort of on down the line. And quick word for the audience out there, please do ask questions and use the Q&A function, and we'll, any questions you have for the panel, and we'll endeavour to answer all for you during the course of the session or at the end. So I suppose let's dig in. First question, what must a good entry-level product offer? How do you keep this within sort of ethos of the independent ethos of individuality and quality? And what wines and indeed spirits best fit this criteria? Who would like to kick off? Matt, should we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for us, the real key thing is the the typicity of what you're offering and making sure it is genuinely the best you can source, of that style and of that type. We've avoided, as I'm sure everyone in this panel has done, avoided brands in terms of brand names and branded companies that we know are in supermarkets. But that doesn't mean you have to avoid the brands which are the great varieties or the regions that those wines are coming from. And certainly being able to offer, a Malbec, that's well priced and allows somebody to access your range for the first time, is a really sensible thing to do, I think. In terms of if you're really looking at the very entry point of wines and where they are from, you are going to have to make some compromises there, but that doesn't mean you have to lose sight of value. And that's really what we're aiming for, is at any price point that we're offering, we're looking to offer customers value through quality, through story, through simply sourcing the best we can at that level.
Yeah, would anyone else like to add to that? Archie, is your...
I think the key thing for us about entry-level wines is that really the manner in which that we select them is exactly the same way that we select every other wine and spirit on our shelf. We're looking for a product that somebody kind of within the buying team or on the shop floor really falls in love with, and you can fall in love with it with qualifiers. You can fall in love with it and say, I think this is a brilliant wine on a shelf at £8. If someone offered to me at 12, I wouldn't think it was amazing, but at £8, this is a brilliant wine. And I think that's really what, for us, where the story always starts. The big change really, I suppose, for us when it comes to our entry level offering, is that we have to try an awful lot more crap to find the stuff that we fall in love with than we do to kind of at higher points on the level. We go to a tasting and a portfolio tasting, and we'll find loads of 15, 20 pound on the shelf wines that we really enjoy. There the question is very different. There the question is this better than something I have already? Is this going to displace something else? At the entry level, we go out and try a huge amount of dross so that our customers don't have to, bluntly. We've got a really lovely kind of paddock rosé that did incredibly well for us through lockdown. It was a #1 selling, kind of rosé. It was £8 a bottle. We were really, really impressed with it. Really, kind of went through more than a pallet of it last summer. And as we would tell customers, they'd be like, "Is it really quite good for £8?" And we're like, "You have no idea how many terrible rosés we tried to find this one good one." So when we assure you that it's good, we're coming from a place of really personal, kind of like, yeah, we poured a lot of wine down the sink to get to one that we wanted to pour in our glass, I think is the way to think about it.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned £8. Quick question in from Janet McLaughlin, who's asking, what are you looking at your entry level price to be? Would that be fairly consistent? I mean, I think if we look at the supermarkets, we're looking at what, sort of just over £6 in the main. If you look at, I think, sort of maybe the Waitroses and M&S's, then you're looking perhaps more closer to £8, I think. So, I mean, Hannah, you're nodding. What happens around your entry sort of pricing?
So
and where it's
our
set?
entry level kind of around £7.50 with discount off, you're down to £6.75 a bottle. So that's kind of where we sit. Going back to what Archie said, totally agree. We've sampled loads of dross. But the one thing that we enjoy doing here is whenever we are sent samples, we don't ask for the recommended retail price. We don't ask for the cost price. We sample everything blind. So we are, in theory, being customers, which is exactly what our customers will be giving us feedback to. And we say whether we think it's value for money or not. And if it doesn't make the cut, it doesn't go on the shelf. And it's that simple. So no matter whatever price point you're looking at, so. Yeah.
So it's a bit of a challenge in a way, isn't it? Because I can see why an independent merchant wouldn't want to be. Is it challenging, kind of trying to? You don't want to go out there and say we've got affordable wines as well, when obviously you've got this fantastic range spread across price points, going in some cases sort of sky high. So is it all about communicating the value that's inherent, which I think you were talking about, Matt, across the whole range? I mean, how do you actually communicate that sort of entry point, especially in terms of, say, pulling in perhaps less wine orientated, less wine savvy consumers who nonetheless would benefit from supporting their local independent merchants?
Yeah, I think so. I think in terms of that latter point, if you're looking at what the supermarkets are doing and then where we start and that value offering. I mean, we have wines on offer every month. And again, I was looking through some numbers and I saw that about 80% of supermarket wine is sold on offer. Whereas for us, to give you an example, wines are on offer every month in our shops. But our shops vary between 5% and 12% of wines are sold on offer. So when you're looking at ranging and looking at what you're doing, having a value proposition that says we are offering value and we're going to give you a discount for these wines this month that have a theme around them. Our customers like that and they pick up on that and they will buy those bottles, but equally they're not only focused on that. And I think when you're looking at the supermarket customer that we are trying to attract, ultimately those numbers you gave around the average supermarket and then places like Waitrose and M&S, we're looking for their top customers. The crossover between the lower end of what we do and the top end of customers that the supermarkets get, that is the crossover. And we're looking for customers really that are one of two things, or even both of these ideally, one of which they're looking to support local, and we've definitely seen that entry point for the local shopping is there because people have more time, is one thing definitely. And the second part is that people are interested in where their wine comes from or where their food comes from, where any of their products come from and why they are like they are. So that, for example, in a supermarket, I would say is an organic customer or somebody that's just thinking a bit about what they're buying. And that's what works for us. But we don't know who those customers are when they walk through our door. So we have to have a proposition that allows them to buy their first bottle and for our staff to talk to them that first time. And then ultimately they and we will work out whether it's going to be the right mix moving forwards. But I think that's how you've got to look at it.
Yeah. Tom, what's your experience at that level?
Yeah, it is interesting touching on what Matt said there, that although we're using and discussing entry level, looking over some of the numbers, especially that national sort of average price, which I think is hovering just under £6, so sort of 5.90 something I saw. You've got to think that's a national bottle average, and we've just been around the table, and barely any of us sell wine retail at that price point. So, and what was even more shocking is if that's the average, that means at least half of it sold under that price point. So, and when we consider the level of wines we're selling at 15, 20, 30, 40, considerably below that price point. So what we're actually talking about is we have a sort of national entry level, which perhaps we're not in that mix at all. And then we have an indie entry level point. And I think that's key difference. Are we trying to get down to that national point? We're certainly not. I don't think many other indie merchants are. So what we're looking at is this sort of independently set indie entry point, and that's where we can start to play. And then it's a case of, as Archie touched on, what is the very best wine we can find at that £7 price point, or that £7.50 price point, and how does it go up against what's on those supermarket shelves? And as a few touched on, that's what we're trying to do, put the very best example forward and say, we're happy that if you bought this from us at £7, that it's going to beat the 5 bottles you can buy in the supermarket for the same price. And that's sort of the key for us to unlocking that entry level, is a genuine ability to say, try one of ours, try one of theirs. And we think you'll like ours more.
Okay, and I think that then it's interesting to bring in a point. I think, Matt, you might have mentioned earlier about talking about ranging, but also you mentioned before we came live the sort of 80-20 rule. You know, obviously 80% of your sales come from 20% of what you're offering, and that does seem to hold true across a lot of sectors of life, actually. How much emphasis then do you or should you be putting on that entry level segment, and can we also bring in that concept of the brands in terms of, you know, those key things that are go-tos like Malbecs, New Zealand Savvy Blancs, Rioja, etc. There are certain things, you know, Pinot Grigio, which sometimes brings a moan around any panel, but customers do seek out those things out there in the wider world on massive scale. So what about the sort of ranging side of it around that? How do you actually tailor it to make it as accessible as possible without sort of diluting the overall esoteric, independent kind of ethos of your shelves? I don't know, Jason, could we bring you in? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what everyone has been saying so far about quality being important, about, you know, the fact that it's difficult, it's more difficult to find good wines at the entry level than it is to find good wines on the top shelf. Yeah, I've said it before, I think anyone can go out and buy good wine that costs £30 a bottle, but going out and trying to find good wines that cost £8 or £9 a bottle on the shelf is much more difficult. For me, I think it's about recognizing that there are two slightly different markets. So the entry-level supermarket buyer, the person who's buying wine at that national price point and below, is really not our target customer. I don't even want that customer necessarily to be trying to buy wine from me. That's not what we do. We are more focused on people who have perhaps expressed an interest in wine by virtue of coming into an independent shop or looking up an independent shop. They are taking it beyond the idea in their mind of just an alcoholic drink. So at that point, it becomes important to have a point of difference from the supermarket. So it wouldn't serve me at all to have the branded wines that supermarkets have. I need to look different. I need to have a different offering. I need to be able to have a different conversation with that customer in order to be able to find out what they like, discover their tastes in wine, develop their tastes in wine, point them towards the right things. And I think, you know, ultimately it's a priority for me not to have wines that appear in the supermarkets to the point where we don't sell a Pinot Grigio. And it's not because we don't have lots of people asking about Pinot Grigio, it's because we've deliberately chosen not to sell it, so that when people say, I would like to buy a Pinot Grigio, we say, well, we don't actually have any Pinot Grigio, but how about you try this, this, or this? And that starts a conversation in itself, which I think is quite important.
Anyone else like to pick up on that? Is there maybe a slightly differing view?
I mean, not so much a differing view, but just a kind of a slightly historical perspective. It was before I was organising for this tasting. I was chatting to Vince Fusaro, who's our managing director, and obviously, Vince, along with his brothers, launched Luvians in 1981. So they've been, in this, for 40 years. And what is really interesting to Vince is the fact that the way that the independent sector and the multiple supermarket sector has really split. It used to be very important for him across really multiple categories to have recognizable brands, and to have kind of real price competition. And what he's found really interesting is the manner in which the those brands that you needed to have really fallen away from the independent sector, to the point that they almost don't exist anymore. There's now really no longer a single category where having the brands is important. I would say champagne is still just about hanging in there. There are definitely customers who shop with us regularly where if we didn't have any of the grand marques on the shelf, they would be, that would be a real problem for them. It's also, I should say, one of the very few categories left where, because of the variable margins, let's call them that grand marques look for, that independence can actually compete with most supermarket offerings. But yeah, your wine, it's really fallen away. Spirits, it used to be a big deal for us to be able to match the price on Gordon's or Smirnoff at come Christmas time, because people would feel that they were being cheated if they weren't. I think people have just now come to accept that you basically, supermarkets are operating in a completely different sphere than we're both selling alcoholic drinks, but that's really about the only place that we're crossing over. And one of the ways that we try and emphasize that with wine particularly is that our entry-level wines are never on offer. They are simply our entry-level, or we call them affordable wines, and they're always on offer. And one of the things we like to point out is when someone comes in and says, oh, that, just using a branded example, when they come in and they see that we do the Macon Village from Louis Jadot, they're just like, oh, that's on offer at Tesco, for £8 right now. And you're like, yes, absolutely. And next month it will be back up to £12, and watch a graph as it does that through the year. We're going to sell you for an honest price of £9.50 every single day of the year. And, that's because that's our ethos. And I think a big part of the entry level in terms of how you present it is about your ethos to the entry level. Am I selling an honest product that we believe in for an honest price? Or am I just trying to use it to bait people into the store to get them to go and buy a can of beans? It's a very different, mentality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think for us, I would say the same thing. We don't really do wine offers. We don't want to play in that particular sphere. So from the point of view of the entry level, it's really about saying these are wines we believe in at the price. They're not going to go radically up in price. They're not going to go radically down in price. They're always going to be here as reliable, interesting, stalwart wines in the range that we think that are effectively a really good starting point for discovering what is in the rest of the range. So, for example, if you're going to buy a Portuguese red for £10, for example, then we think that is also a good introduction to what Portuguese red wine can do, and that might be a springboard to spending £12 in a Portuguese red, because if someone really enjoys it, then you can build on that. But yeah, I think it's important that those wines are, for us, a fixed price, and that we're not constantly in a sort of, as Archie says, a game of looking at where the best price on X, Y, or Z wine is at any given point.
Can I jump in with a little thing on sort of balance between, we've touched on ethos and image, and actually the sort of business side that we're all sat here running wine businesses, and that business element is important. And sometimes when we have these conversations, I'm going to play a little bit devil's advocate here. I agree with what both Archie and Jason are saying. But as an industry, we can be sometimes quick to say, I don't want that business, or I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to be doing that. And in the early days when I first opened, I had to get any business and any and all business that I could do to make it a success. So I had a message of, I'd sooner have 10% of something than 100% of nothing. So if somebody's willing to give me a little bit of profit for selling a bottle, I was going to take that. And then it leads on to this idea of balance and just listening to the guys. And it sort of occurred to me, at what point when you are perceived by the customers as expensive, when you increase your percentage of wines on the shelf that are above 12, 15, 20, do we inherently lose a section of the market because they look at us as an independent and think, well, I buy my wine from Tesco at £6 and I'm happy. I'm not going to go in there. I'm not going to have that initial conversation. But then on the flip side, you also have to look after your independent image, because at what point, by having cheap wines on the shelf, do you alienate your premium customers? At what point do they think they're not quite the merchant I thought they were? I'm going to go, I'm looking for luxury. I'm looking to be sold that premium. Do I want to be walking past shelves with £5.99, £6.99 bottles? And it just occurred to me, we just need to have a successful range on the shelf. It's all about that balance. Can you do both? Can you have the entry level that we're talking about, 6 or 7, and the premium at 100? And if so, that's the balancing act we're trying to master, I suppose, to bring in the widest range of customers that we can sell to.
Yeah, I mean, it links to a question here, which from Sadie Wilkins, which I'll condense just a little, but she's suggesting that you've got to acknowledge the fact, we have to acknowledge the fact that some customers, it's not just they're seeking to get alcohol, but some feel intimidated by shopping an indie wine merchant. They sort of feel the need to have specialist knowledge and they don't have it. So I think we'd all recognize this. And it's part of the balance, I think, Tom, you're talking about, isn't it? It's keeping the special, but not necessarily intimidating those who aren't specialists themselves. So that once you get them in, it's fine, because you can take them by the hand, take them by the palate, and then sort of walk them through. And once you begin to find out what they enjoy, I mean, this is obviously part of your raison d'etre. But Sadie goes on to say, for some, the level they accept in supermarkets is linked to how pressurized they feel in selecting the bottle. Once they get through the indie door, they see the quality, they can switch up. But how does the panel work towards removing the stigma of buying for supermarket entry-level wine buyers? So it sort of relates to what you're saying, but does anyone else want to jump in on that? How do you just take away that uncertainty, that fear, for want of a better word? Jan Siskane mentioned this morning, back to the good old bad old days, using Berry Brothers as an example, their wonderful St James shop, but you'd walk in, you couldn't see a single bottle, and there the conversation was about, don't even quite know how to pronounce it, so I can't just sneak a bottle of Chassagne Montrachet off the shelf, I can't say it myself, off the shelf, or whatever it may be, a Greek bottle, God forbid, try and get your tongue around it if you've never met it before. Does anyone sort of pick up on that?
I can have a go. We've gained a lot of customers that were buying wines in supermarkets, over the whole lockdown. And you've got to kind of remove the intimidation of buying wines from indies. We ask people open questions. We ask them what they use. We build them with their own profile, if you like. And it does help if you have incredible memories to remember as well. If you don't have the technology to back you up, sort of thing, you get to know people on a real one-to-one level. We've done different things to engage with customers. We've brought in Vine lines, so people can have one-to-one consultations. We've had Zooms, we've had we've done masterclasses, we've done Instagram lives, we've done the whole lot, and we've made it more accessible. The other thing I've noticed is more females are now purchasing the wine that years ago, 20 years ago, I remember doing wine tastings and 95% of the people in the room were male. And now it's a 50-50 split, and it's lovely.
I think women are buying more.
But when we're doing our big charity events, it's nice to see the suits and ties have kind of gone, and people in shorts and t-shirts and relaxing, enjoying wine and spirits, and that's what it's about. And so when you've engaged with people and you've kind of got their taste profile, then when we all like tasting wine, we all like sampling spirits, but we can kind of sample a wine, whether it's £10 on the shelf or £20 on the shelf or £30, we can already get in our mindset the customers that we think would really like that wine, whether it's Portuguese, Lebanese and things like that. And we've switched people that would normally buy New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc onto like Asserticos. We've tried so many different wines, and people have really, really enjoyed them. And people that would normally drink Viogniers have gone to Lebanese Obeidis, and Cote de Rones now drinking Georgian Saparavis. It's just been amazing, you know. It's a totally different way of thinking now, and I think the personal service comes in, is the focus for us now moving forward.
And Hannah, I think that's really interesting. And maybe draw that out a little more as well, because, for example, I mean, you know, Zoom technology we're using now, this was all possible before. Obviously, I'm sure we'd all prefer to be sitting in person around a table with you, the audience out there, who we can't even see live in front of us, to just pick up all that lovely networking and just socializing that we humans love to do. But there must be surely takeaways from this, from the massive ramping up of online sales, perhaps events like this, the realization that there are other methods to reach out, other channels to reach out to customers. I mean, the very fact that the majority of people have experienced a serious uptick in online sales, is that in itself not useful, both in terms of getting more information back about customers? How do you fold that in as well? What have we learned? What can we take forward from these sort of the pandemic times, when you will have footfall, more greater footfall back in store as well? How's all that going to evolve? And is that going to help in any way? Or is there anything you can harness to, again, bring in those sort of new, perhaps more reticent customers to win their trust? Matt, you're nodding up there.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I was thinking about in terms of our range and what we see in our shops and what we see differently through our website is that the website actually has a lower average bottle price customers are paying, but because we have a minimum delivery, it actually has a higher order value because they have to spend 100 to get the free delivery. So we're definitely seeing a different customer base there, interacting in a different way. And for me, definitely, one of the drawbacks of being an independent merchant and having the range of wines we have is you cannot have a tasting note on every single wine. So immediately you're taking away the clues that supermarkets often have with their little descriptions, you know, just their two-liners. And therefore it's the staff having to be friendly, you know, etc., and all of the approachability, but you've still got a barrier there you've then got to find a way around. Whereas with the website, you have all the space in the world, if you want it, to have all of the information about the wine, about the tasting notes, about providing personalized suggestions, about using all the data that way. And we are definitely moving down the route, and already have done, of bringing our website into our shops through the use of iPads, etc. Because what it means is that if we have certain wines on a display in our shop, we can actually have the iPad securely held there with a page ready loaded with all of the background information and potentially even things like a video of the vineyard, which makes it more accessible. And equally, if you're talking to a customer and they've got a wall of wine, that iPad can show them all the tasting notes without you having to clutter your whole shop with far too much information. So I think there's huge potential just through a website, leaving aside all the things like Zoom tastings.
Yeah, and Jason, did you want a word on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. It's certainly been an interesting situation to have a pandemic setup where the one thing that we've gotten out of it is a huge new uptake of customers for the independent sector at precisely the time at which we are prevented from doing the things that we would traditionally do as the independent sector to welcome those people in. So you have this strange double-edged sword situation where on one hand you've got a lot of new customers, but the stuff that you would normally do to engage them, tasting samples at the weekend, you know, having a nice busy store full of people where the loud and confident ones who know you and want your wine recommendations can talk, and other people can sneak in through the front door and not be noticed. All of those sorts of things have disappeared. So it has been, I think, an unusual period to trade. But for us, what I've seen is that, you know, the ability to use an online platform as, in a sense, a shop window, a way of easing someone into the idea of what that company is like or what it might be like to shop with them in a bricks and mortar way can be quite useful, because we've certainly had a lot of online orders that have turned into, you know, people coming into the shops further down the line. And I think at that point, then they start to really see the full value proposition, which is that yes, online is there. Yes, you can buy conveniently. And yes, there's a possibility of browsing the range, making selections, getting a feel for the company. But it's really once people get in through the door that you have the opportunity to do what we've been talking about, which is really provide that personal experience, like Hannah was saying, to really engage with them as people and understand their wine choices and give them a level of, you know, human service that they would never be able to get in a supermarket.
Yeah. Does anyone else want to pick up on that? Archie?
Yeah, I mean, two things. Obviously, I think we mentioned Zoom a few times, but I mean, I do, for us, it's hard to overstate what a huge tool Zoom has become for us. I mean, we're doing tastings very much like this one, not webinars, but you know, kind of having everyone on screen. But we're doing tastings like that to the public every single week, every Friday. And then private tastings has been a convenient way to bring people together. But we're doing two or three of those every single week. And so just through those, we've kind of grown, kind of our contact list and the people who are interested in our company. We've grown it, several thousand, kind of people. And for the first time, I think obviously we are based in Fife in Scotland. We are, would have been kind of classified and treated a very regional merchant. Unless the wine world of Britain sometimes forgets that outside the M25 exists. Scotland is still seen the way the Romans thought of anything north of Hadrian's Wall, and trying to get reps or winemakers outside of Edinburgh and Glasgow could be a challenge. All of a sudden, we are able to talk to wineries and distilleries and breweries and just say, look, we can now give you a UK wide audience. You want to come and do a winemaker tasting or meet the brewer or anything like that, we can have you in homes all over the UK in a way that we were never able to do before. And coming back to the that whole entry level, how you trade people up. I do think obviously the website's been incredibly useful for that. The fact you can sort things by price band. So somebody says, I don't want to look at wines over £9. They can cut out the entire intimidation factor. But what I find interesting is for us, that's actually reflecting something that we did in store already. We have essentially, it's the simplest thing in the world, a stack of wines that divides our shop as half spirits, half wines. It's a pretty classic traditional setup. And literally as you come in through the door, there's a stack just before you get to all the other wines that is our affordable wines. They're all wines that are under £10, and we list them by white, red, and rosé. They wrap around the stack in order of kind of heaviness, effectively. You're going from the lightest and then wrapping around to the darkest. So it's a way of presenting wines to people that you don't need to be scared by any of the other wines in this store. We are effectively presenting these in a way that's very familiar to supermarket shoppers. Because the independent trade, one of the things that almost every bottle, the vast majority of bottles of wine sold in the UK are sold in supermarkets, and they're divided up into white, reds, and rosés. It's the one system of organization I never see in any independent shop. We're massively resistant to it. And so that is an immediate challenge to people. So if you can say, look, here is just an understandable, relatable way. And then it's the job of the people who work there, the people who are passionate about them, to do exactly what Jason was saying earlier. So, do you love this £10 Portuguese red on our stack? Awesome. Let me take you over to our Portuguese section. And there's a whole world there that we can show you if you just want to spend that little bit more. And that's where the interaction kind of comes from. And I think the challenge for us has been to do that and convert these sales that we've got, and they've been tremendous online, which are the entry-level stuff where we are clearly borrowing from the supermarkets. We are taking from the supermarkets, and to turn them into long-term sales. What we're trying to do is get that conversation going. Otherwise, you just wind up with people buying the same, case every single time, and that's a very losable proposition. It's something that's difficult to hold on to. But if you can get them into your funkier, more interesting stuff, then that's the key, really.
One of the things I'd really like to mention is that the entry level, I mean, we've talked about it from the point of view of how you poach entry level buyers from one merchant, effectively a supermarket or a multiple, to an indie. But I think the entry level also has a really important function in a different context, which is that our average bottle price is probably around £15–16 a bottle. And for a lot of people who can buy wine from us, they won't even necessarily know that we have entry level wines. They are coming in for special occasion wines, or they're coming in for nice wines, or they're coming in because they've been to the butcher and they've got themselves a nice, sirloin steak, and they're planning to have a nice weekend, of wine and food, and maybe it's a birthday, maybe it's a celebration, whatever. And I think the entry level is also very useful there, because I believe very strongly in the art of the downsell, which is when someone comes in and they're buying something that's £15 or £20, to be able to say to them, by the way, if you like this, you'll also like this other wine, which costs £9.50. And that, I think, is one of the most powerful things that independent merchants can do psychologically, because it immediately puts customers at their ease. Because I think most people are terrified that they're going to be upsold all the time. So if you have a customer who comes in and it's maybe their first experience in an indie store, they've never been in before, they don't really know much about wine, they'll often say things when you say, you ask them the sort of standard, how much do you want to spend and so on. Oh, you know, sort of £25. And you can tell by the look in their face that they really, really don't want to spend £25. That's what they think they should be spending because they're in a fancy wine shop. You say, well, okay, for £25, you can get this. This is, you know, the Chateauneuf de Pate. But honestly, one of my favorite wines is this Baccarat, which is £18. And you really can't go wrong with the Côte du Rhône for 12. And for me, it's a victory if they go out having, you know, bought the Baccarat and the Côte du Rhône more than it is if they buy the Chateauneuf de Pate. Not just because the average spend is higher, but because what I've done is in wine that secretly they were just a little bit too shy to say, actually,
Excellent. You faded out just a little at the end there, Jason, but I think we got the overall gist, certainly, of the points you were making. I'm just going to move it on a little bit, and I'm aware of time as well. We've covered some really, really fascinating ground, but I've got sort of 3 questions, actually, which all kind of relate to each other. So I'll try and bundle them up a little bit, and then ask for some sort of thoughts and replies from you guys. So we've from the supplier Ryan Dunn. He's asked what level of volume commitments, if any, do you have when buying wines you'll retail at say £8, and he's making an assumption you need to achieve say 30% GP on those. Just to come back to another couple of questions. Hal Wilson asked about buying groups, both officially and unofficially. Can they help to meet the aims by delivering volume savings on more individual wines and spirits? And then there was a question, so from Palatish, I'd like to know from the panel if they have experience of own label entry-level wines, and if so, would they recommend it to others? How do they source and what volume of order was expected? Now, I think in a way that those all relate. So I guess to try and condense it down to one, are the ways in which, or what are the best ways in which on your bigger volume selling wines, that you can successfully find ways of helping ease pressure on your margins, or indeed, you know, building a little bit more margin in? Because I guess if you're going to be selling at a lower price, but a reasonable volume, then it's worth investigating those routes now. So if any of that made sense, who would like to pick up on that? Archie, you're smiling at least. So.
Yeah, I was smiling as much at everyone else's reactions as much as anything else. Yeah, I think the volume commitment's always a difficult one. It's very individual. I mean, I look at the #1 selling red wine that we do that coincidentally happens to sell for £8. And I look at that, and we are taking, roughly, we're taking kind of a pallet or 2 pallets of that every month. But that's a relationship that's been built up over, it's been built up over 10 or 12 years now. We started buying from them. So that's been an expectation that has been built up, and really, rather than helping us, it's helped us the cost as much as anything else. That's been an £8 wine for going with our customer. That's really helped.
Sorry, we lost you a little bit in the middle of that, actually, Archie. Just the last couple of sentences, last sort of points you were making. I think you may have frozen out just a little bit. Would anyone else like to pick up on that while Archie's
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I mean, we've been asked about £8. Do we have to commit to, wines to retail at £8? Do we have to commit to volume? And actually, I think from our perspective, quite a few UK suppliers have worked hard to deliver wines that we can buy from their normal list at normal prices without having to commit to half pallet of this or a pallet of that, or take the risk of trying to ship ourselves. And actually 30%, you're looking at sort of cost price $4.65 a bottle. Now, I'm not saying that there are huge amounts out there offered by UK suppliers. but there are definitely wines. You know, I could pull out 4 or 5 supplier lists and quite quickly request 12 to 15 samples of wines at that price point. And then, as the guy said, it's part of our job to go through that, taste what they can offer, and pick out the gems that are there. So I think with a little bit of work, using normal UK suppliers, you could find a good range at sub £8 without having to commit to any volumes. Obviously, once you do start to commit to the volumes and you can offer those pallet prices, then we're seeing savings on transport. The suppliers themselves are often seeing savings behind the scenes and able to give better pricing. And we all know volume drives better pricing. But I don't think it's essential that you commit to huge volumes, especially shops that suffer from small storage or cash. In the early phases, cash flow is a worry. It's nice to have those wines to fall back on.
Anyone else like to comment on that? Does anyone else have any effectively own label wines on their shelves?
Yeah, we do. We've created our own label range about 2 years ago now. We actually made a decision that for us, we didn't think our own label should be the cheapest wines in the shop. We felt that actually what we're trying to do with our own label is go right back to the very beginning of this conversation, which is to offer the very best wine we could at the right price. And so therefore our own label range tends to focus at around about 11 to 14 pounds. It's in that kind of price range. But certainly when you get into own label, then yes, there are, you do have to make minimum orders for that labelling run to take place.
Matt,
I have to say it varies widely.
I was just going to say, do you mind if I ask a question? Which wines did you decide you wanted to feature in that own label range? Which regions or styles did you select as a company?
We've started with a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. Again, I talked about earlier about how you need to give customers a way to access you, and a New Zealand Sauvignon was an obvious choice. We had a Rioja in there, and we had a white Burgundy and a red Bordeaux. So, I mean, the combination there really was just to give some really basic starting points. We're actually going to expand it further this year and have some wines that go a little bit away from that real core, but we felt it was right to start again with brands that people would recognize that our name could be put on. And again, as I say, across the range there, I think probably you are having to order at least a couple of pallets to be bottled at the same time to be able to have a labelling run done. And some places were extraordinary volumes, but you can definitely do it. You just have to work through your producers. And of course, sourcing an own label from producers you already work with, where there's already a volume commitment and a relationship, is absolutely the way forward, because they're more likely to be flexible because there's a wider business to be done. Yeah.
And on such wines, your own label, is it a mix? I mean, are margins specifically any better, or is it performing a different function in store? It's a sort of almost a reassurance, your mark as the Jeroboams brand, saying, hello, this is kind of what we're about. This is a good entry point, as in entering into the range point, not obviously lowest price, as you pointed out. Is it?
Yeah, absolutely right. It wasn't to make more margin. I mean, we'd have to be doing much bigger volumes to actually make that a better margin. Yeah, you'd be having to look at containers, really. We're not at that level. But ultimately, yes, I guess the guiding principle in my mind was, what are our customers asking for us when they're having a party? You know, when they're having a group of friends around, when they have that little occasion or that barbecue in the garden, what are those wines? And we want to be able to give you those wines to those people to go and share with their friends that really represent those and they can trust in. And that was our guiding principles. Yeah.
And just, if you don't mind if I come in, sorry, having ducked out earlier there, sorry about that. We don't, although we have looked at own label wines, but we certainly have done our own label bottlings of whiskey, of Armagnac, of gin, of beer. And I think there, to back up what Matt was saying, we're not making more margin on those, but what you're able to do is really twofold. One, you're able to kind of really reward your staff a little, and you kind of, I know that one of the most fun things that we do every year is when we go to kind of a local brewery and brew our own beer, and the whole staff goes down, and it's a decision that they make together, and they kind of like, they look at hops and and malt styles, and they build a beer together. We usually actually do it as a competition, so that one of our shops goes, does their own beer, the other shop goes, does their own beer, and then both the beers are available for sale in both shops, and it becomes a bit of a competition over who sells their beer out first. It's all about bragging rights. But also, I think you can, and in terms of the gin and the whiskey is a single cask. It's selected by ourselves. It is about taking your brand and literally distilling it. It's about taking your brand and saying, right, this is what we care about. This is what we think. These are the people we've partnered with. And then the bit that's never to be forgotten, getting your own brand in somebody's house is the greatest bit of marketing you can ever do. If you can get your brand on somebody's shelf so that 3 weeks after they've last visited you, they go and grab that bottle of gin off the shelf or go to pour themselves a dram and they go, oh yeah, Luvians, yeah, it's been a while, we should really kind of pop back in. And that's the kind of reminder that as an independent, you can't afford to do with television advertising or anything like that, but you can do with well-chosen kind of own branded products.
Yeah, excellent. Okay.
Can I just grab a quick sentence about what you said there, Andrew? That's really resonated with me. You said about Matt's own label range that actually it's not an entry point if we term entry point as price driven, but actually entering into the range. And I think that's pretty much nailed it for me. What we're talking about is not necessarily the cheapest we can all get to. We can all go out and source really, really cheap juice. It's that point that each of us has a different shop mentality, each of us has a different customer base, and it's what point we want to get those customers to enter into our range. That's the price point we seem to be talking about. And entry level doesn't have to be fixed. My entry level price point will be different to everybody else's around the table. So trying to fix that idea that we all have to aim for this entry level point is what causes that race to the bottom that does nobody's business any good. It's setting our own stall out and saying, this is, as you said, great phrase, an entry into our range, and it's specific to each shop.
Tom, I think that's a really fantastic point, and I think we'll begin to sort of wrap up there. But I think that we've come to a really good conclusion, strong conclusion towards the end of the discussion. With making that point and building on what you, Archie, and the rest of you have said. Would anyone like to add any sort of final words? Is there anything you're sort of burning to get off your chest about retaining custom, about where the entry point is into your range, etc.?
The only thing I was going to say is that we all focus on the commercial advantage that supermarkets have with their volumes. But I think we all have a commercial advantage over the supermarkets on our volumes. The supermarkets, they benefit from pricing and supplier support because of the volumes they buy, but they cannot buy wines from people that don't make enough wine. And that's where we come in. We have wines we can access that are better, and the supermarkets know they're better at price points, not even more expensive, but they can't stock them because it can't be a continuity line across their range. And I think that's what we have to focus on, is where are those opportunities, both specific producers and regions of the world as well. That's really the point that we can make.
Following on from that, things we've all learned by doing things like the Instagram live tastings and getting these amazing winemakers. We were in Argentina one night, and then we were in Burgundy the following night, and then we were in Australia the following week. These guys, the tastings get picked up by the wine writers. So our one with Vineyards was picked up by The Guardian, and it was highlighted, and we were inundated. Like Archie was saying, we, posting around the country, we were sending a lot of wine around the country, and all of a sudden Vineyards was known about. But it also comes down to the guys and girls that write in the Sunday supplements as well. They've got to start supporting the indie trade as well, and highlighting, because we can all, like everybody said, we can all race to the bottom, but that's not feasible for indies to be hitting a £5 bottle of wine. It's not possible. So if we love what we do and we love the products we sell and we're really passionate about, then we should, it also encompasses those guys as well. They need to support the trade and the winemakers as well. So, and we can all work together. So.
Yeah, again, I think a very, very nice point, and neatly made. With time running, but just a quick comment. A sort of question from Karen Jenkins in the audience. Lots of chat arguments about influencers, she says. Are indies not the real vinfluencers, now augmented by better online activity due to COVID, which I just thought was quite a nice comment to read out, I suppose, as much as, and I think it's sort of loosely tied with, or ties well with quite a lot of what we've talked about how to pull in customers and engage with them and keep them entertained. And
I think that's going to be our biggest challenge moving forward. Archie, Jason have all touched on, and Hannah as well, on how important the website's become to get ourselves out there to a wider audience. But it's taking the skill that's set us all up as independent merchants, which is the passion and the ability to convey that to customers. I mean, I'm still rushing to Archie's shop to buy some of that Portuguese red he was banging on about before. It's that passion that we've all got. How do you put that online? How do you successfully convey that message, convey that passion and desire to introduce people to better wine when all you've got is written text on a website? And that's going to be the challenge for us over the next few years.
I think that's a challenge, and I would just add one more thing, which is that I think, you know, in thinking about entry levels and so on, and the challenge of stocking entry level wines, it is important to remember that we are very different businesses, and that our customers don't just shop in one shop. It's entirely possible that they buy from the supermarket and from independent, so that there is a balance to be struck there, understanding that we share customers. And I think it's also important to make sure that you're clear about what it is that you do well as an independent merchant, and not get too wrapped up in trying to copy or, you know, somehow imitate what other areas of, you know, the wine trade are doing. I think, you know, if the past year has taught us anything, it's really that indies have a huge amount to offer, and that there's a real appetite for buying wine in independent shops, and a real, you know, route to develop that. And I think it's about having confidence in what we do, confidence in our palates and our brands, and being able to take that forward and say, look, we might not be the cheapest, we might not be able to compete with the national bottle price, but we have a lot more that we can offer. And the entry level wines are really entry point wines into the ethos of a merchant, not just into the idea of inexpensive wine.
Yeah, again, well. I think at that point I'll wrap up the session, but we've covered some really great points to be made, and I think it's been some really fascinating discussion, and I hope it's been stimulating and of interest for you, the audience out there. And thanks for questions flowing in. I know we haven't quite covered all of them. Also, if you, we've got more events going on this afternoon. We have a webinar at 2 o'clock, how to forge the best relationship with suppliers. And then at 3:15, we have Building Back Better webinar, which focuses on rebooting the on-trade for 2021. That's actually one we recorded a couple of days ago, but there's some really interesting points made there with your sort of parallel drinks experts over in the sadly missed at the moment on-trade. But all that remains is for me to say thank you very much to the panel, Matt, Tom, Jason, Hannah and Archie. A real pleasure talking to you, hopefully in the flesh next time in the not too distant future. And thank you very much to the audience for joining us. So thank you very much all.